The company party was supposed to be a celebration of success, crystal chandeliers, laughter echoing off marble walls, executives raising glasses to loyalty and teamwork. And then, without warning, injustice struck. In the middle of the music and applause, Ethan Cross turned to speak to his wife. And she was gone. Not outside, not in the restroom, not answering her phone. All that remained was her clutch on the balcony ledge, still warm, like she'd been erased mid-second. By morning, rumors had already started spreading about him, not her. Whispers that he was unstable, that she left because of him. Then security handed him a video file and said one sentence that changed everything. "Sir, you need to see this." What was on that screen promised a story far bigger, darker, and more dangerous than a missing person. Before we dive in, take a second to comment your city and your local time right now. And if you enjoy deep cinematic drama stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The ballroom looked the same in daylight, but the magic was gone. What had felt glamorous hours earlier now seemed artificial, like a stage abandoned after the audience left. Chairs were stacked, flowers wilted. The smell of champagne clung to the air, sour and stale. Ethan Cross stood near the entrance, hands shoved into his coat pockets, trying to convince himself that this was all a misunderstanding, that Lena would walk out of an elevator at any second, annoyed that he'd made such a big deal out of nothing. She didn't. The memory of the night before replayed on a loop he couldn't shut off. Lena had been smiling, radiant, in that quiet way she always was at public events. She never tried to dominate a room, but people noticed her anyway. She had squeezed his hand on the balcony, leaned in close, so only he could hear her over the music, and joked about how corporate parties felt like expensive lies, wrapped in polite laughter. He'd laughed back, distracted by a colleague calling his name. It was a moment no more than 30 seconds. When he turned again, she was gone. At first, he hadn't panicked. People drifted in and out of parties all the time. He checked the bar, then the restroom hallway, then the smoking terrace outside where the night air had been sharp and cold. He called her phone once, twice. By the fifth call, unease had begun to crawl up his spine. By midnight, it was panic. He searched places guests weren't supposed to go: service corridors, staff elevators, quiet corners behind curtains. Each time he asked someone if they'd seen Lena, he felt himself shrinking under their polite confusion. Some looked sympathetic, others looked annoyed. A few glanced at him with something like suspicion, as if he were already the problem. When he finally asked event security for help, they exchanged a look that felt rehearsed. One of them told him calmly that his wife had likely left early and suggested he go home. Another said the cameras were managed by hotel administration and couldn't be accessed without formal approval. The music was still loud. The executives were still smiling. And somehow Ethan felt like the only person in the building who understood that something was terribly wrong. Now standing there the next morning, he felt the weight of that wrongness pressing down harder. He approached the front desk again, repeating his name, explaining again that his wife had vanished during the event. The receptionist's expression shifted slightly when she typed his name into the system. She excused herself and disappeared into a back office. That was when Ethan noticed the man watching him from near the elevators. Grant Voss leaned casually against the wall, coffee in hand, perfectly pressed suit already back in place like the party had never ended. Grant was one of those people who seemed built for corporate life. Smooth voice, easy smile, eyes that never stopped calculating. He raised his cup in a small salute when their eyes met. "Rough night?" Grant asked, strolling over as if this were a coincidence. Ethan didn't answer right away. He was suddenly aware of how exhausted he must look. Red eyes, wrinkled shirt jaw clenched too tight. "Have you seen Lena?" he asked. Grant frowned the picture of concern. "No, I assumed she'd gone home. You were pretty upset last night." The words landed wrong. Pretty upset. Not worried, not searching, upset. "I was looking for my wife," Ethan said flatly. "Of course," Grant replied smoothly. "I just meant it was a stressful night. Big crowd, big expectations. These things happen. What things, Ethan pressed? Grant shrugged lightly. People leaving without saying goodbye. Miscommunications. He smiled again, but there was something hollow behind it. Listen, HR's already buzzing. Maybe take a day or two off. Get some rest. I'm sure she'll turn up. HR's already buzzing. Before Ethan could respond, the receptionist returned with a hotel security supervisor, a man in his late 40s with tired eyes and a careful tone. He introduced himself as Marcos and asked Ethan to step aside. They moved to a quiet seating area near the windows. The city outside was bright, indifferent, moving on as if nothing had happened. Mr. Cross, Marcos said, lowering his voice, we reviewed some of the footage from last night. Ethan's pulse spiked. And there's something you should see. Marcos hesitated, glancing around. Off the record. He reached into his jacket and slid a small flash drive across the table. Ethan stared at it, a piece of plastic. That was it. That was all that stood between him and answers, or between him and something far worse. Why are you giving this to me? Ethan asked. Marcos didn't meet his eyes, because what's missing matters more than what's there. Ethan took the drive with shaking fingers. He didn't watch it in the lobby. He didn't trust himself not to react. He left the hotel, got into his car, and sat there with the engine off, the city noise muted behind glass. Only then did he plug the drive into his laptop. The video opened to a grainy hallway view near the service corridors. The timestamp read 10:46 p.m. around the time Lena disappeared. He leaned closer, barely breathing. There she was. Lena walked into frame posture, stiff, her smile gone. She wasn't alone. Someone was just out of view beside her, only an arm visible for a moment guiding her forward. She paused at a door, turned her head slightly as if listening. For a split second, her eyes lifted toward the camera. They weren't drunk. They weren't careless. They were afraid. The door closed. The screen went black. That was it. No exit, no follow-up, no explanation. Ethan slammed the laptop shut, chest heaving. His first instinct was to call the police. His second was to scream. His third, the one that frightened him most, was the quiet, creeping realization that this hadn't been random. Back at home, Lena's apartment felt wrong without her. Her shoes were still by the door. Her jacket was missing. The bed was untouched. Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, head in his hands, replaying every interaction from the past few weeks. The late nights she brushed off, the way she'd stopped sharing details about her day, the tension he'd mistaken for stress. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. Stop digging if you want her safe. No signature, no explanation, just a threat. Ethan stared at the screen, a cold clarity settling in his chest. This wasn't about a missing person anymore. It was about power, about control, about a story already being written without him. And unless he fought back quietly, carefully, he would lose her twice, once to whoever took her, and once to the lie they were preparing to tell the world. Ethan didn't sleep. He lay on the couch with the laptop open beside him. The paused frame of the hallway burned into his mind even when his eyes were closed. Every few minutes he checked his phone, half expecting another threat, half praying for Lena's name to light up the screen. Nothing came. The silence felt deliberate, like someone was watching to see how he would react. By sunrise, his fear had hardened into something cold. He returned to the hotel just after 7. The lobby was quiet now, occupied only by early checkouts and staff moving with practiced efficiency. He noticed how different it felt to walk in alone. No smiles, no congratulations, no music. Just marble glass and the echo of his own footsteps. Marcos was already waiting near the security office. He looked surprised to see Ethan so soon, but not displeased. You watched it, Marcos said quietly. Yes, Ethan replied. It's incomplete. Marcos nodded once. That's not an accident. They stepped into the small security room. Monitors lined the walls, most showing live feeds of empty hallways and loading bays. Marcos shut the door behind them. "The file I gave you isn't the original," he said. "It's a copy, and it's missing about 12 minutes. Ethan's stomach dropped. "Where is the rest?" Marcos exhaled slowly. "That's the problem. It was accessed, edited, and then replaced in our system before the morning audit. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing." "Who has that kind of access?" Ethan asked. Marcos hesitated. "Hotel administration, corporate liaisons. Anyone high enough to ask without leaving a trail." Ethan thought of Grant's easy smile, of the way he'd said HR was already buzzing. "Can you recover it?" "Not without triggering alerts," Marcos said. "And if this goes official too fast, it disappears for good." Ethan nodded grimly. He was beginning to understand the rules of this game. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me what you could." Marcos studied him for a moment. "Be careful," he said. "People who make others vanish rarely stop at one." Outside, Ethan sat in his car and called the one person he'd avoided until now, Lena's sister. Nadia Hart answered on the third ring. "Ethan." Her voice sounded tight, controlled. "She's missing," he said, skipping pleasantries. "I need to know if she told you anything. Anything at all." There was a pause. Too long. "She said she needed space," Nadia replied finally. "She said things were complicated." "That's not enough," Ethan said. "She didn't just walk away." "I have video, Nadia." Another silence. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted, less defensive, more afraid. "You shouldn't have that. So you know something," Ethan said. "I know she was scared," Nadia admitted quietly. "And I know she didn't want you dragged into it. Dragged into what before he could press further, Nadia ended the call, saying she needed time." Ethan threw his phone onto the passenger seat, frustration surging. Everyone seemed to know pieces of the truth, except him. He went to the police station next. The desk officer listened politely, took notes, and nodded in all the right places. But when Ethan mentioned edited footage and corporate involvement, the energy in the room shifted. Procedures were cited, jurisdiction questions raised. He was advised to wait 24 hours before filing a missing persons report to allow for voluntary absence. Voluntary absence. Ethan left feeling smaller than when he'd arrived. It was mid-afternoon when he noticed the first real crack in the carefully built narrative forming around him. At a cafe near the office, 2 co-workers sat at the table behind him. They didn't know he was listening. "Heard she left him at the party," one said. "Apparently he caused a scene." "Figures," the other replied. "He's been under a lot of pressure. Promotions change people." Ethan stood abruptly, chair scraping loud against the floor. The voices stopped. He didn't turn around. He couldn't trust himself to. Back in his car, his phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. "Check your car." His heart slammed into his ribs. He scanned the interior, then the back seat. Nothing. Hands shaking, he stepped out and circled the vehicle. That's when he saw it, something glinting near the passenger side door. Lena's necklace. It lay on the asphalt, like it had been dropped deliberately. The delicate chain tangled the small pendant, catching the sun. Ethan picked it up slowly, memories flooding in. She never took it off, never. And she hadn't been wearing it at the party. Someone had been in his car. The message was clear that they were close. Too close. That night, Ethan locked every door and window and sat at the kitchen table with the necklace in his palm, replaying every detail he could remember. The way Lena's shoulders had tightened whenever certain names came up. The late-night emails she'd minimized too quickly. The time she'd asked him, out of nowhere, if he trusted the company more than he trusted her. He hadn't understood then. Around midnight, there was a knock. Ethan froze. The knock came again, soft, careful. He opened the door to find Nadia standing there. Eyes, red arms wrapped tightly around herself. "They're lying about you," she said immediately. "I saw the messages, the ones spreading at work. Why didn't you tell me what you knew?" Ethan asked, anger and relief colliding. Nadia swallowed. "Because she made me promise. She said if anything happened, I had to keep you from charging in blind." "Then start talking," Ethan said. "Because she's gone, and I'm already blind." They sat at the table. Nadia told him about late-night calls, about Lena's fear that she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see, about her belief that if she stayed quiet long enough, it would all blow over. "She didn't want to ruin your career," Nadia said softly. "She thought she could handle it." Ethan closed his eyes, guilt washing over him. He'd been so focused on proving himself at work that he'd missed the warning signs in the person who mattered most. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video file. No message, just the file. Hands trembling, Ethan pressed play. The screen filled with static, then resolved into a distorted image of Lena. She was seated, shoulders slumped, eyes dull. She looked straight into the camera. "Please," she said. Voice slightly warped. "Stop looking for me. Let this go." Ethan's breath caught. He knew her voice too well. The rhythm was wrong. The pauses unnatural. It wasn't a plea. It was a script. Nadia covered her mouth, tears spilling over. "That's not her," she whispered. "No," Ethan said, jaw tightening. "It's a warning." As the screen went dark, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Fear was still there, heavy and relentless, but beneath it, something else was taking shape. Resolve. Whoever was behind this wanted him isolated, discredited, and scared into silence. They wanted him to doubt his wife, doubt himself, and accept the version of events they were quietly feeding to the world. He wouldn't. If this was a war of stories, then he would find the truth and make sure it was the one that survived. Morning came with a sharp, unforgiving clarity. Ethan stood at the bathroom sink, staring at his reflection as if it belonged to someone else. His eyes were bloodshot, his face hollowed out by a night that had stripped away any illusion of control. The necklace lay beside the sink, its chain coiled like a question with no answer. Lena's face from the distorted video replayed in his mind over and over until he couldn't tell where memory ended and fear began. He went to work anyway. Part of him hoped normalcy might anchor him, that walking into the glass and steel building of Asterwin Tech would somehow reset reality. Instead, the moment he stepped into the lobby, he felt the shift. Conversations paused. Eyes flicked away too quickly. The receptionist offered a tight, rehearsed smile that didn't reach her eyes. By the time he reached his floor, the lie had already spread. Grant Voss was waiting near the conference rooms, leaning against the wall like he owned the space. He straightened when he saw Ethan, concern sliding neatly into place. "Hey," Grant said, lowering his voice. "I was going to call you." Ethan stopped in front of him. "About my wife?" Grant's expression tightened just a fraction. "About everything. Look, man, people are worried. You left the party pretty shaken. There are questions about what Ethan asked." Grant glanced around, as if checking for eavesdroppers. About how things were at home. About whether Lena left because she felt unsafe. The word hit like a slap. "You're suggesting I hurt her," Ethan said quietly. "I'm saying rumors travel fast." Grant replied, palms up in mock surrender. "And HR doesn't like uncertainty." As if summoned by the conversation, a woman from Human Resources approached. She was polite, efficient, and entirely unmoved by Ethan's visible distress. She asked him to step into a small office just for a quick chat. The door closed. The blind stayed open, a subtle reminder that privacy was an illusion. "We've received an anonymous report," the HR representative said, folding her hands neatly on the desk. "It alleges inappropriate behavior at the company event." Inappropriate how Ethan demanded. Raised voice, aggressive demeanor, emotional instability, she recited. "Given the circumstances, we believe it would be best for you to take temporary leave." "My wife is missing," Ethan said. "And you're sidelining me." "We're protecting the company," she corrected. "And you." He laughed, then a short, bitter sound that surprised even him. "You're protecting a narrative." Her expression didn't change. "Please turn in your badge before you leave today." When Ethan stepped back into the open office, he felt stripped of something more than access. Conversations resumed around him, but now he heard fragments clearly. Her poor Lena. Always thought something was off. HR had no choice. Grant watched from his desk, sympathy carefully measured, eyes cold. Ethan left without saying goodbye to anyone. Outside, the city pressed in traffic sirens, people moving with purpose. He felt disconnected from all of it, like he was watching life through glass. His phone buzzed in his pocket. For a split second, his heart leapt. Nadia. "They're doing it," Ethan said the moment she answered. "They're painting me as the problem." "I know," Nadia replied softly. "Someone from the company called me, asked questions that had nothing to do with finding Lena." Ethan gripped the phone tighter. "Did you tell them anything?" "No," she said quickly. "But Ethan, there's more. Lena didn't just stumble onto something. She was being pushed." "By who?" he asked. "I don't know names," Nadia said. "She wouldn't tell me. She only said there was someone above her reach, someone who made problems disappear." Ethan thought of the edited footage, of the missing 12 minutes, of how quickly HR had moved to isolate him. "They're trying to bury this," he said, "and they're using me as the shovel." That afternoon, he drove to Lena's apartment building. The security guard at the desk hesitated when Ethan asked for access logs. "She hasn't been back," the guard said finally. "Not since before the party." "Did anyone come looking for her?" Ethan asked. The guard shifted uncomfortably. "There was a woman, older, well-dressed. She said she was family." Ethan's stomach tightened. "When late last night," the guard replied. "She didn't leave a name." Ethan went upstairs anyway. Lena's apartment was exactly as he'd left it, but something felt off. Drawers slightly ajar. The faint sense of being intruded upon. He checked her laptop, hoping desperately that he might find a clue she'd missed. At first, there was nothing. Emails, calendars, normal life. Then he noticed a folder buried 3 layers deep, labeled with a generic string of numbers. His pulse quickened as he opened it. Inside were screenshots, spreadsheets, emails forwarded from unknown addresses, all of them tied back to Asterwin. Financial discrepancies, shell accounts, conversations that ended abruptly when questions were asked. Lena hadn't been paranoid. She'd been investigating. A knock at the door made him jump. He closed the laptop and moved quietly, peering through the peephole. A woman stood outside, mid-50s, tall, silver-streaked hair, braided neatly back, dressed in an immaculate cream-colored suit. She smiled when Ethan opened the door, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Ethan Cross," she said smoothly. "I'm Vivian Klein." The name landed with weight. The company's CFO. "I came to offer my condolences," Vivian continued. "About Lena, and about the misunderstandings at work." Ethan didn't invite her in, but she stepped forward anyway, glancing around the apartment like she was cataloging it. "This must be very difficult," Vivian said. "But the worst thing you can do right now is escalate." "You mean look for my wife?" Ethan asked. "I mean make accusations you can't prove," she replied calmly. "Asterwin values discretion, cooperation. And if I don't cooperate?" Vivian's smile thinned. "Then the story gets uglier. For everyone." Ethan met her gaze, fear and fury tangling in his chest. "You know what happened to her." Vivian studied him for a long moment. "I know that some doors once open can't be closed. Lena opened one." She turned to leave, pausing at the threshold. "Let this go, Ethan, or you'll lose more than your job." The door clicked shut behind her. Ethan stood there shaking. The visit had confirmed what he'd been afraid to admit. This wasn't just corporate indifference. It was active suppression. And Vivian Klein wasn't trying to help him find Lena. She was trying to make sure he didn't. His phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "Last warning." Ethan stared at the words, then at the open laptop on the table. Lena had tried to do this alone. She'd tried to protect him by staying quiet. He wouldn't make the same mistake. If they wanted silence, he would give them noise. If they wanted him isolated, he would find allies. And if they thought fear would break him, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. He picked up the laptop, the necklace, and his keys. The first lie had been told. Now it was his turn to start unraveling it. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and old paper, a place where urgency dulled into routine. Ethan sat on a hard plastic chair, the folder from Lena's laptop balanced on his knees. his fingers tracing the edge like it might anchor him. He had been waiting nearly an hour when a woman in a dark blazer stepped into the lobby and scanned the room with sharp, assessing eyes. "You're Ethan Cross," she said, not a question. He stood. "Yes, Detective Mara Quinn." She shook his hand firmly, her grip grounding. "Walk with me." Her office was small, uncluttered, the walls lined with case files that looked heavier than they appeared. She gestured for him to sit and waited until he did before speaking. "I'm not officially assigned to your case," Mara said. "In fact, there isn't a case yet. But a hotel security supervisor called me this morning. Off the books." Ethan's heart jumped. "Marcos." Mara nodded. "He's careful and scared. That tells me a lot." Ethan slid the folder across her desk. "My wife didn't disappear. She was taken." Mara didn't argue. She opened the folder and scanned the contents with practiced speed, her expression tightening as she moved from page to page. "This isn't amateur work," she said finally. "Financial manipulation access logs internal emails. Your wife was digging into something big." "She tried to protect me by staying quiet," Ethan said. "Now they're using me to cover it up." Mara leaned back, studying him. "People who orchestrate this kind of disappearance don't rely on one move. They layer lies. They control the story. And right now, they're winning." "Then help me change that," Ethan said. Mara held his gaze. "If I do this, I do it my way, quietly, no charging in, no public accusations until we can prove intent." Ethan nodded. He didn't trust himself to do anything loudly anyway. Their first stop was the hotel again, this time through the side entrance. Marcos met them near the service elevator, his shoulders tense. "I shouldn't be doing this," he said as he swiped his card. "But I keep thinking about her face on that camera. She wasn't leaving. She was being led." The elevator descended into a narrow corridor beneath the hotel's main floors. Pipes ran along the ceiling. The air was colder, here heavier. "This hallway connects to executive-only spaces," Marcos explained. "Conference rooms, private lounges, areas reserved for corporate partners." Mara stopped in front of a door marked "Staff Only." "Was this door accessed that night?" Marcos nodded, manually. No digital record. Someone didn't want a timestamp. Inside, the room was empty now, the table polished, the chairs perfectly aligned. But Ethan could picture it, the fear, the silence, the moment Lena realized she was trapped. Mara knelt, examining the doorframe. "Scratches," she murmured. "Fresh enough?" Ethan swallowed hard. "She fought, or tried to signal," Mara said, "which tells me something else." She stood. She thought someone would come looking. Back in the lobby, a bartender was wiping down the counter. Mara approached him with a friendly smile. "Rough night yesterday?" she asked. The bartender shrugged. "Corporate parties always are." "Did you notice a woman leave suddenly?" Mara asked. "Dark hair, green dress." The bartender hesitated. "Yeah, she wasn't drunk. That's what stuck with me. She looked scared, like she was forcing herself to walk straight." "Was she alone?" Ethan asked. The bartender shook his head. "No. There was a guy with her. Tall, executive badge. Didn't say a word." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Did you recognize him?" "Not really," the bartender said. "But he didn't look like hotel staff." Outside, Mara exhaled slowly. "That narrows it," Grant Ethan asked. "Maybe," Mara said. "But I don't think he's the architect. He's too visible." Ethan thought of Vivian Klein's measured threats. Then it's someone higher. They parted ways with a plan to move slowly, deliberately. But the world didn't wait. By the next morning, Ethan's suspension had turned into something uglier. An internal email circulated quietly among employees, framing him as unstable, volatile. Someone had leaked that HR was concerned for Lena's safety prior to her disappearance. Ethan saw the email when a former colleague forwarded it anonymously, adding only one line. "I'm sorry, the damage was immediate." His phone buzzed with missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Messages ranged from awkward concern to outright accusation. He turned his phone off. Later that afternoon, he met Mara at a diner far from the city center. She slid into the booth across from him, her expression grim. Your company's legal team contacted the department, she said. They're pushing hard, suggesting this is a domestic issue. Ethan laughed bitterly. Of course they are. Which means we need leverage, Mara said. Something they can't bury. Ethan thought of the files on Lena's laptop. She was collecting evidence, he said. But she didn't finish. Then we finish it, Mara replied. They started with access logs cross-referencing badge entries from the night of the party. Most executives had airtight alibis. Photos, witnesses, applause-filled timestamps. But one name appeared inconsistently. Caleb Raines, the CFO's chief of staff. Why wasn't he on the guest list, Ethan asked. Because he wasn't there to celebrate, Mara said. He was there to manage risk. They pulled what they could on Caleb. Clean record, trusted, invisible. The kind of man who solved problems quietly. That evening, as Ethan reviewed the data at home, a soft knock came at the door. He froze. Through the peephole, he saw a young woman shifting nervously from foot to foot. Early 20s. Professional clothes, but wrinkled like she'd been wearing them too long. He opened the door cautiously. My name is Tessa Wren, she said quickly. I work at Asterwin. I shouldn't be here. Ethan stepped aside without a word. Inside, Tessa's hands shook as she spoke. I was asked to alter access logs the night of the party. Grant told me it was urgent, that a mistake needed correcting. A mistake? Ethan asked. She didn't leave, Tessa whispered. Your wife didn't leave. They needed it to look that way. Ethan felt his knees weaken. He gestured for her to sit. I didn't know what it was, for Tessa continued. But then I saw the footage being edited. I heard Caleb say her name. Why are you telling me this now? Ethan asked. Because they're planning to blame you completely, she said, tears spilling over. And because I can't sleep anymore. Mara arrived minutes later. She recorded Tessa's statement, carefully, gently promising protection she wasn't sure she could deliver. As Tessa left through the back door, Ethan felt a strange mix of fear and hope. For the first time, someone inside the machine had cracked. His phone buzzed when he turned it back on. A message from the unknown number. You're making this worse. Ethan stared at the screen, then at the recorded testimony, then at Lena's necklace on the table. No, he said aloud. Voice steady despite the storm inside him. You are. Somewhere behind closed doors and carefully constructed lies, the people who had taken Lena were starting to realize something they hadn't anticipated. He wasn't backing down. Ethan woke to the sound of his phone vibrating on the kitchen table. Not ringing, vibrating insistently as if whoever was calling didn't want to leave a trace. For a moment, he lay still, heart pounding, listening to the faint hum against the wood. When he finally picked it up, the screen showed no number, just a file transfer request. He didn't open it right away. He showered, dressed, and made coffee he barely tasted, forcing himself to move slowly. Whoever was sending files at dawn wanted him reactive. Panicked. He refused to give them that satisfaction. Only after he sat down, laptop open, did he accept the transfer. The video was shorter than the first, cleaner, wider angle. Ethan's breath caught as the hallway appeared again, but this time the frame included the service elevator doors. Lena entered from the left, her steps hesitant. A man walked beside her, fully visible now. Tall, dark suit. His face partially turned away from the camera, but Ethan didn't need to see it clearly to feel the recognition strike like ice. Caleb Raines. He watched the clip twice. 3 times. The way Caleb leaned in slightly, his hand hovering near Lena's elbow, not touching but close enough to guide. The posture wasn't aggressive. It was worse. It was controlled. Professional. Like this was a conversation he'd had many times before. At the end of the clip, Caleb glanced up. Not at the camera past it, as if he knew exactly where the blind spots were. The file ended. No message followed. Ethan slammed the laptop shut, chest-tight, thoughts racing. This wasn't a random leak. Someone wanted him to see this. Someone inside the system was feeding him pieces just enough to keep him moving, not enough to finish it. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Mara. I just got something, he said the moment she answered. So did I, she replied. Meet me, now. They chose a small park near the river, public enough to discourage surveillance, quiet enough to talk. Mara arrived with a paper coffee cup in one hand and a familiar grim focus in her eyes. You're thinking Caleb Rains, she said before he could speak. Ethan nodded. You've seen it. I have, Mara said, and I hate that it confirms my worst suspicion. She explained what she'd found overnight. Caleb's access privileges spanned both Astwin facilities and several partner locations, including the hotel and a private clinic across town. He was a fixer, someone executives trusted to make problems disappear without ever attaching their own names. He doesn't act without approval, Mara said. Which brings us back to Vivian Klein. Ethan's jaw clenched. She warned me to let it go. And now she's escalating, Mara said. Your suspension has turned into a formal investigation. They're building a case to discredit you permanently. Then we move faster, Ethan said. Mara studied him. That's dangerous. So is standing still, he replied. They drove separately to avoid patterns. At Ethan's apartment, they spread Lena's files across the table again. Mara's eyes stopped on a document Ethan had overlooked the first dozen times. What's this? She asked. Ethan leaned in. It was a draft email never sent. Subject line blank. The body only partially written. If you're reading this, it means I didn't have time. The problem isn't just the money. It's the way they erase people. If I disappear, the rest was empty. Ethan swallowed hard. She knew. She suspected Mara, corrected gently. And she was preparing. They searched Lena's laptop deeper this time, looking not for evidence, but for patterns. Recent searches, deleted files, encrypted folders. That's odd, Ethan murmured, pointing at a string of repeated searches, employment NDA consequences, false confession, witness liability. They threatened her with legal ruin, Mara said. Forced cooperation under the guise of compliance. Ethan felt the weight of it settle in his chest. Lena hadn't been taken off the street. She'd been cornered. A knock at the door made them both tense. Ethan checked the peephole. Marcos stood outside, hat pulled low, eyes darting. Inside, Marcos wasted no time. I shouldn't be here, he said, but I pulled something before my supervisor locked me out. He slid a tablet onto the table and played the clip. It showed a wider camera angle from a loading bay, grainy, poorly lit. A black SUV idled by near the service exit. The timestamp matched the missing 12 minutes. The back door opened. Caleb stepped out first. Lena followed. She paused at the threshold, turned her head back toward the building, and raised her hand fingers, curling slightly inward. Ethan's breath hitched. That gesture, he whispered. She does that when she's scared, when she doesn't want anyone else to notice. Mara nodded. A private signal. They put her in the car, Marcos said quietly. And then the footage cuts. Why give us this? Ethan asked him. Marcos hesitated. Because my sister disappeared 10 years ago. Different city. Same silence afterward. Ethan didn't know what to say. He just nodded. After Marcos left, the room felt heavier charged with truth and fear. Mara gathered her notes. We need to assume she's alive, she said, which means they still need her. For what, Ethan asked. Leverage, Mara replied. Or confession, or silence. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a calendar invite. No sender name, just a location. An underground parking garage beneath an office complex downtown. 30 minutes from now. Mara shook her head immediately. No, that's how people vanish. They already took her, Ethan said. This might be the only way to get closer. I won't stop you, Mara said. But you don't go alone. They parked on opposite levels, arriving minutes apart. The garage was dim concrete pillars casting long shadows. Ethan's footsteps echoed too loudly in his ears as he walked toward the center. A figure emerged from behind a column. Tessa Wren. She looked even more nervous than before, eyes constantly flicking to the ramps above. I don't have much time, she said. They're watching internal traffic now. What did you find? Ethan asked. Grant ordered me to alter logs, she said. But Caleb authorized the override. I saw the approval code. Mara recorded everything careful and precise. They're planning to move her again, Tessa added, voice shaking. I heard it this morning. They think you're getting too close. Ethan's chest tightened. Where I don't know, Tessa said. But I know this. If they lose control of the narrative, they'll sacrifice someone. Before Ethan could respond, headlights swept across the garage. Tessa gasped. I have to go. She ran. Ethan turned just in time to see a black sedan roll slowly past windows, tinted engine, idling too quietly. A note was tucked under his windshield wiper when he returned to his car. You were warned. Ethan crushed the paper in his fist, adrenaline surging. They weren't hiding anymore. They were daring him. Back at home, he sat alone, staring at the wall, the echo of Lena's signal looping in his mind. Fear pressed in from every angle, but beneath it a sharper emotion took hold. Clarity. They believed power would protect them, that reputation would shield them, that he would break before they did. They were wrong. Ethan opened his laptop, organized every clip, every testimony, every file Lena had left behind. He didn't know yet how or when he would use them, but he knew one thing with certainty. This wasn't just about finding his wife anymore. It was about exposing a system that believed it could erase people without consequence. And he was done letting them write the ending. Ethan spent the night organizing Lena's files until the sun crept through the blinds like an uninvited witness. He worked with a precision he didn't know he possessed, labeling folders, cross-referencing timestamps, building a map of intent rather than events. Events could be denied. Intent was harder to bury. By dawn, he had a working theory, and it terrified him. The folder Lena had hidden wasn't just evidence, it was leverage. She hadn't planned to go public. She'd planned to negotiate. The searches about NDAs and false confessions weren't academic. They were survival tactics. Someone had put a choice in front of her: sign cooperate, disappear quietly, or watch Ethan become collateral damage. She'd chosen him. Ethan closed his eyes, guilt pressing down like a weight. He hadn't been there when she needed him most. He'd been chasing milestones, trusting systems, believing that good work insulated good people. Now he knew better. His phone buzzed with a message from Mara. I'm heading to a courthouse archive. Meet me after. He took a breath, grabbed his keys, and left the apartment, careful to vary his route. The city felt different now. Corners sharper, reflections suspect. Every parked car seemed to watch him. Every passerby could be a coincidence or a plant. He kept moving anyway. They met at a quiet coffee shop tucked between a print shop and a tailor. Mara slid a manila envelope across the table. Corporate NDAs don't scare judges, she said. But patterns do. Inside were sealed filings tied to Astorwin subsidiaries, cases settled quietly, names redacted, complaints withdrawn. Wrongful termination, whistleblower retaliation, emotional distress. Each one ended the same way: silence purchased at scale. They don't erase people, Ethan said slowly. They erase credibility, Mara nodded. And once you're discredited, anything that happens to you becomes plausible deniability. Ethan's phone buzzed again. A new email. No sender, no subject, just a single attachment. He hesitated, then opened it. A scanned document appeared on the screen, a cooperation agreement. His wife's name typed cleanly at the top. Pages of legal language followed, dense and suffocating. Near the end, a line jumped out: voluntary statement, acknowledging unauthorized access and intent to harm corporate interests. They tried to force her to confess, Ethan whispered. And if she refused, Mara said they'd finish the story without her. The email disappeared seconds later, auto-deleting itself, as if it had never existed. They're testing you, Mara said, seeing how much you know. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Then we test them. They moved carefully over the next 2 days, letting the pressure build without reacting publicly. Mara nudged a few contacts. Ethan leaked nothing. He wanted them anxious, guessing, overcorrecting. Power hated uncertainty. On the 3rd day, it worked. Grant Voss reached out through an intermediary an old colleague Ethan barely remembered. The message was casual, almost friendly. Grant wants to clear the air. Private conversation. No lawyers. Mara was unequivocal. It's a trap. Everything is, Ethan said. But traps work both ways. They chose a neutral location, a hotel lounge far from Asterwind's orbit. Public enough to discourage violence. Private enough for mistakes. Grant arrived 10 minutes late, immaculate as ever. He ordered a drink, smiled too easily, and leaned back as if this were a favor. Hell of a mess, he said. I'm sorry about Lena. Truly. Ethan didn't respond. Grant sighed. Look, I don't want this to get ugly. For you. For the company. You mean, for you, Ethan said quietly. Grant chuckled. You always had a sharp edge. That's why they promoted you. Who's they? Ethan asked. Grant's smile faltered for a split second. He recovered quickly. You're spiraling. That's what people are saying. People like you, Ethan said. Who ordered log changes? Who coordinated edits? Grant's eyes flicked to the bar, then back. I followed instructions. There it is, Ethan said softly. Instructions. Grant leaned in. You don't understand the scope. I was protecting everyone. By framing me, Ethan asked. Grant swallowed. By containing damage. Ethan let the silence stretch. He could almost hear Mara's voice in his head. Don't push. Let them talk. Grant took another sip, nerves creeping in. Caleb handled logistics, he said, barely above a whisper. Legal handled language. I just smoothed edges. Vivian approved, Ethan said. Grant looked up sharply. You didn't hear that from me. Ethan didn't need to. The admission hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Before Ethan could press further, Grant's phone vibrated. He checked it, color draining from his face. I can't do this, Grant said abruptly, standing. You're playing with fire. As he turned to leave, Ethan spoke. Where is she? Grant paused. Just long enough. I don't know, he said. But if you keep going, you'll find out how much they're willing to burn. He left without another word. Outside, Mara waited in a parked car, recording device in hand. He slipped, she said after listening to the playback. Not enough for charges, enough for leverage. Ethan stared at the building Grant had disappeared into. He's afraid, good Mara said. Fear makes people careless. That night, Ethan received a voicemail from an unfamiliar number. Lena's voice filled the room, clearer than before, less distorted, but still wrong. Please stop, she said softly. They'll hurt you. Ethan closed his eyes. He could hear the pauses now, the unnatural pacing, the edit points. It's spliced, he said aloud. They're using her voice like a weapon. Mara arrived minutes later, having heard the same message forwarded to her line. They want you to back down, she said, which means you're close. Ethan's resolve hardened. Then we go public. Mara held up a hand. Not yet. We need one clean confession. Something that ties the chain together. Ethan thought of the cooperation agreement, of Grant's fear, of Caleb's calm authority in the footage. They think they can still control the narrative, he said. So we make them think they've lost it. He drafted an email from a burner account, attaching a blurred screenshot from Lena's files and a simple message, full backup uploaded. Attorneys reviewing. The email went out to 3 addresses. Grant's, Caleb's, Vivian's. Within an hour, Grant called. Ethan let it ring. When he finally answered, Grant's voice was frantic. You have no idea what you're doing. Meet me, Ethan said. One last time. Bring the files, Grant pleaded. We can fix this. Ethan smiled grimly. You already fixed it. Now you finish it. He hung up and looked at Mara. They'll come. And when they do, Mara said they'll talk. Ethan glanced at Lena's necklace on the table, the small pendant catching the light. Hold on, he whispered. I'm coming. Somewhere behind sealed doors and rehearsed statements, the people who believed they could erase the truth were starting to realize a fatal miscalculation. They had underestimated how far a man would go when the only thing left to lose was silence. The underground garage smelled of oil and damp concrete, the kind of place where sounds stretched too far and shadows felt intentional. Ethan parked on the far side, engine off, lights dark. He waited, counting his breaths, listening to the distant whine of tires spiraling down ramps above. Mara had insisted on proximity without presence close enough to intervene far enough to let fear do its work. A set of footsteps approached, uneven and hesitant. Tessa emerged from behind a pillar, arms wrapped around herself, as if the air were cold. She looked smaller here, swallowed by the scale of the structure. Her eyes darted to every corner. "I shouldn't be here," she said, voice trembling. "They flagged my access this morning." Ethan kept his tone calm. "You did the right thing." "Right gets people erased," Tessa whispered. "I've seen it happen." She pulled a folded printout from her bag and handed it to him. It was a sequence of access logs, time-stamped and annotated in the margins. Names were redacted except one: Caleb Rains. He authorized the override, Tessa said, not verbally, through a coded approval. That's how they avoid trails. Ethan's pulse quickened. And Grant, he delivered the order, she said. But he didn't design it. He was scared. Still is. A car rolled slowly into the garage, headlights cutting across concrete. Tessa flinched. "They moved her," she blurted. "I heard it this morning. They think you're close to forcing a mistake." "Where?" Ethan asked. "I don't know," she said, tears pooling. "Only that it's not permanent. They still need her compliant." The car passed without stopping. The silence that followed felt heavier. Mara's voice came softly from Ethan's earpiece. "We're good. Continue." Ethan nodded slightly. "You're not alone anymore," he told Tessa. "But you need to be careful. Leave the city if you can." Tessa shook her head. "I can't run. That's what they expect." Before Ethan could respond, a low hum echoed, another vehicle descending slower this time. A black sedan eased into view and stopped 2 rows away, engine idling. Tessa's face drained of color. "That's them. Go," Ethan said. "Now." She ran, footsteps slapping against concrete, disappearing up the stairwell. Ethan stepped back into shadow, heart-hammering eyes fixed on the sedan. The driver's window lowered a fraction, just enough to suggest presence without invitation. The car didn't move. It waited. After a minute that felt like an hour, the sedan pulled away and vanished up the ramp. Mara was beside Ethan seconds later, jaw tight. "They wanted you to see that," she said, a reminder. They returned to the car in silence. When Ethan reached for the door handle, he saw the note tucked beneath the wiper. "You're next." He crumpled it in his fist, the paper biting into his palm. "They think fear will end this. They always do," Mara said. "It's their favorite language." Back at the apartment, Ethan paced while Mara made calls. She spoke in measured tones, leveraging old favors, pushing on doors that didn't like to open. When she hung up, her face was grave. "They're closing ranks," she said. "Internal affairs is being stonewalled. Corporate counsel is already circling." Ethan stared at the wall, at the faint mark where Lena had once leaned her head while laughing at some trivial story. "Then we changed the battlefield." How? Mara asked. "By letting them believe they've lost control," he said. "Not publicly, strategically." He opened his laptop and cued the clips, the hallway, the loading bay, the partial confession. He created a decoy package, enough truth to terrify, not enough to convict. Then he sent it from a burner to a single address he knew would ripple outward. Grant Voss. The reply came faster than Ethan expected. "We need to talk, now." They met in a glass-walled cafe overlooking a river, daylight, washing everything in the illusion of transparency. Grant arrived early, hair slightly out of place, fingers tapping an anxious rhythm against his cup. "You're going to destroy everything," Grant said the moment Ethan sat down. "You already did," Ethan replied. Grant leaned in, voice low. "You don't understand who you're provoking, Caleb," Ethan said. "And Vivian." Grant's eyes flicked away. "They won't hesitate." "Neither will I," Ethan said evenly. "Where's she?" Grant swallowed. "I don't have that." "You know who does?" Ethan pressed. Grant exhaled, shoulders sagging. "They forced her to sign," he said. "Statement. An admission. She refused at first. That's why he stopped himself. That's why she vanished," Ethan finished. Grant nodded, misery etched across his face. They planned to parade it if needed. Make it look voluntary. Ethan stood. Then you're done running. Grant's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and went pale. They know we're talking. Good, Ethan said. Now choose. Grant's jaw worked as if words were stuck behind his teeth. I'll give you something, he said finally. But not here. They parted without another word. Outside, Mara waited, eyes searching Ethan's face. He's cracking, she said. He's terrified, Ethan replied. And that's when people make mistakes. That night, the voicemail came again, Lena's voice clearer, closer. Ethan listened with his eyes closed, mapping the cuts, the breaths that didn't belong. I'm okay, she said softly. Please stop. Mara shook her head. They're escalating emotional pressure. Which means time's running out, Ethan said. They traced the background noise in the voicemail, a faint hum, a distant bell matching it against recordings. Mara snapped her fingers. That's a clinic chime, private, corporate adjacent. Ethan's heart raced. They're holding her under medical pretense. Or transit, Mara said. Temporary, controlled. Grant called just before dawn, voice shaking. I can't do this anymore, he said. Meet me. I'll show you. They drove to a nondescript office complex near the outskirts, windows, dark security lights bright. Grant waited near a side entrance, eyes darting. This place isn't listed, he said. Shell lease. Caleb uses it. Inside, the corridors were sterile, too clean. Grant led them to a conference room and pulled up a feed on a wall-mounted screen. A room appeared small, sparse. Lena sat on a bed, shoulders, slumped, eyes hollow but alive. Ethan's breath caught. Lena. She didn't look at the camera. She stared at her hands, fingers curling inward in that familiar, terrified signal. They're moving her tonight, Grant said, out of state. Mara turned on him. You're coming with us. Grant shook his head. They'll kill me. They already would have, Ethan said. This is your last chance. Sirens wailed in the distance, too far but coming. Grant's face crumpled. I'll testify, he said. I'll give you the chain. The screen went black. Lights flicked on in the hallway. A voice echoed from behind them, calm and cold. That won't be necessary. Caleb Raines stepped into view, flanked by security. Ethan felt the world narrow to a point. Mara's hand tightened around her badge. Caleb smiled thinly. You should have stopped when we asked. Ethan met his gaze steady, despite the storm inside him. You should have never taken her. The moment hung brittle and electric as the cost of silence finally came due. The corridor froze in a way that felt unnatural, like the air itself had been instructed to hold still. Caleb Raines stood with his hands clasped behind his back posture, relaxed eyes calm, too calm for a man who had just been cornered. The security guards beside him didn't rush forward. They didn't need to. Power radiated from Caleb in quiet waves. Detective Quinn Caleb said pleasantly, I was hoping we wouldn't have to do this in such a public way. Mara's badge was already visible, her voice steady. You're obstructing an investigation. Caleb smiled faintly. There is no investigation. There's an emotionally compromised employee trespassing on private property with stolen materials. Ethan stepped forward before Mara could stop him. Where is she? Caleb's eyes flicked to Ethan, assessing, cataloging. Your wife made choices, he said evenly. Unfortunate ones. Grant stood between them, shaking. You said she'd be fine, he blurted. You said this would be clean. Caleb turned his head slowly. Grant, he said, disappointment threading his tone. You were told to leave. Sirens grew louder outside, closer now. Caleb glanced toward the sound, then back at Mara. This ends now, he said, for everyone's sake. Before anyone could move, Grant lunged, not at Caleb, but toward the console. He slammed a key, and the screen behind them flickered back to life. Lena appeared again, closer this time. Her face filled the frame, eyes lifting toward the camera as if she sensed something had changed. Ethan's breath caught. Lena, he whispered. Caleb's calm cracked. Turn that off. Mara stepped forward. Don't. The siren stopped outside. Footsteps thundered down the corridor. The guard stiffened. Caleb straightened his jacket. "You think this changes anything?" he said quietly. She sighed. She didn't, Grant said hoarsely. She refused. Caleb's jaw tightened. For the first time, anger surfaced. "You were warned." Uniformed officers flooded the hallway. Mara spoke quickly, clearly presenting the evidence chain she'd prepared for exactly this moment. Caleb's protestations were smooth rehearsed, but they faltered as warrants were produced, as names were read aloud, as Grant's recorded admissions were played back on a body cam. Ethan barely heard any of it. His focus was on the screen. On the way, Lena's fingers curled inward again. That same small signal, fear, yes, but also something else now. Hope. "She's alive," he said, voice breaking. Mara nodded. "And we're going to get her." Caleb was escorted past Ethan, wrists cuffed. He leaned in just enough to be heard. "You've won a moment," he said, "not the war." Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "You already lost." They moved fast after that. Locations were traced from the feed's metadata, cross-referenced with shell leases. A private facility outside the city, corporate-owned, discreet, designed to look like a wellness retreat. The kind of place that hid people in plain sight. The drive felt endless. Ethan watched the road blur beneath the windshield, heart pounding with every mile. Mara drove focused, efficient. She said nothing until the gate came into view. The facility was quiet, too quiet. Security lights glowed against manicured hedges. Officers moved in formation, swift and controlled. Doors were breached. Commands echoed. Ethan was told to stay back. He didn't listen. He followed the sounds, raised voices, hurried footsteps down a long hallway that smelled faintly of antiseptic. A door at the end stood ajar. Inside, Lena sat on a bed, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked thinner, paler. But when she lifted her head and saw him, something in her eyes shattered in grief. "Ethan," she breathed. He crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to his knees in front of her, careful, as if she might disappear if he moved too fast. He didn't touch her at first. He just looked, memorizing the fact that she was real. "I'm here," he said, voice trembling. "You're safe." Her hands flew to his face, fingers pressing hard, grounding herself. She laughed and cried, at the same time, a broken sound that cut straight through him. "They told me you'd stopped," she whispered. "They said you believed them." "I never did," he said. Not for a second. Miss Mara stood in the doorway, giving them space while medics checked Lena's vitals. Officers moved in and out, cataloging evidence, sealing rooms. The machine that had hidden her was finally exposed. Hours later, as dawn crept in and pale and uncertain, Ethan sat beside Lena in the back of an ambulance. She leaned against him, exhausted eyes closed, but peaceful. "They wanted a confession," she said softly. "They wanted me to say I stole the data, that I planned to hurt the company." "And you didn't," Ethan said. She shook her head. "I wouldn't give them you." The words hit him harder than any threat ever had. He closed his eyes, pressing his forehead to hers. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner." She squeezed his hand. "You see now." The fallout was immediate and brutal. By midday, the story broke. Not the version Asterwin had prepared, but the truth. Journalists dug into sealed settlements. Stock prices wavered. Names surfaced. Vivian Klein's office released a statement that collapsed under scrutiny within hours. Grant turned state's witness. Caleb was charged. Warrants expanded. The system that believed itself untouchable began to eat its own. Weeks later, Ethan sat in a quiet courtroom as testimony unfolded. He watched as power tried and failed to reframe itself. He testified once, calmly refusing theatrics. Lena testified too, voice steady, despite the weight of every eye in the room. When it was over, they walked out into the sunlight together, hands intertwined. The air felt different, lighter, not because the damage was undone, but because it had been named. They resigned from Asterwin the same day. Healing wasn't immediate. Some nights, Lena startled awake. Some mornings, Ethan checked doors twice. But they faced it together, truth between them, like a shield. On a quiet evening, months later, Ethan watched Lena stand by the window, necklace clasped around her throat again. Fingers relaxed. They tried to erase me, she said softly. But they forgot one thing. What, he asked. She turned, meeting his eyes. I wasn't alone. Outside, the city moved on, loud, imperfect, alive. And for the first time since the night everything shattered, Ethan believed the future was something they could choose. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and recycled air. A place where truth was supposed to arrive, neatly packaged and sworn under oath. Ethan sat beside Lena on the narrow bench. His hand wrapped around hers, feeling the subtle tremor she tried to hide. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but their presence was felt anyway. Reporters waiting outside, analysts refreshing feeds, the world eager to consume what had been hidden for so long. Across the room, Vivian Klein sat perfectly composed, legs, crossed hands folded in her lap, as if attending a board meeting rather than a preliminary hearing. Her expression never wavered. Not when Caleb Raines was led in wearing cuffs. Not when Grant Voss took the stand, voice cracking, as he described orders he once carried out with pride. Vivian watched it all like a distant observer, insulated by attorneys and years of carefully cultivated power. Ethan leaned toward Mara, who stood nearby with a file tucked under her arm. She's not even nervous. Mara didn't look away from Vivian. That's because she believes she's still untouchable. Grant's testimony landed like a controlled detonation. He spoke of coded approvals, of verbal instructions never written down, of how problems were framed as risks to be mitigated rather than people to be protected. He named names. He described the night of the party in detail, the timing, the edits, the transport. When the prosecutor asked who ultimately authorized the operation, Grant hesitated. His eyes flicked to Vivian for half a second. Answer the question, the judge said. Grant swallowed. Vivian Klein. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Vivian's attorney rose immediately, objecting, redirecting, reframing. The judge sustained some, overruled others. Vivian herself didn't react until Lena was called. Lena stood slowly, steadying herself before walking to the witness stand. Ethan felt her fingers squeeze his hand once before she let go. It was a small gesture, but it carried a lifetime of trust. She spoke calmly, clearly. She described the files she found, the pressure that followed the choice placed in front of her. She didn't dramatize. She didn't embellish. She told the truth as if it were something solid she could set down on the table between them. They told me if I cooperated, my husband would be safe, she said. If I didn't, they would make him the story. Vivian's attorney attempted to undermine her credibility, suggesting emotional distress, suggesting misinterpretation. Lena didn't flinch. I know the difference between stress and coercion, she said quietly. And so do you. When it was over, Lena stepped down without looking at Vivian. Ethan stood as she returned, wrapping her in a careful embrace. The judge adjourned for the day, and the room erupted into motion. Lawyers conferring, officers escorting, defendants, reporters straining for glimpses. Outside, flashes exploded as soon as they emerged. Ethan shielded Lena instinctively, guiding her through the crowd. Questions flew about betrayal, about power, about justice. He didn't answer any of them. In the days that followed, the narrative shifted again, but this time not against him. Documents surfaced. Former employees came forward. Patterns became undeniable. What had once been dismissed as isolated incidents now formed a clear, damning picture. Asterwin's board announced an internal review. Vivian Klein took a sudden medical leave. Stock prices dipped, then slid. The company issued statements full of regret and procedural language that fooled no one. Still, Vivian remained free. She's buying time, Ethan said one evening, watching the news play silently on the television. She's very good at it, Mara replied. But time runs out when enough people stop protecting you. That moment came sooner than anyone expected. A junior analyst named Tessa Wren appeared on the evening news, face pale but determined. She told her story in full, about altered logs, about coded approvals, about the fear that kept her silent until silence became unbearable. She named Vivian Klein directly. The response was immediate. Prosecutors expanded charges. Warrants were issued. Vivian's attorneys scrambled. Ethan and Lena watched the broadcast together, fingers intertwined. Lena's breathing quickened, memories resurfacing, but she didn't look away. "I thought I'd be alone," she said softly. "I thought no one would believe me." Ethan kissed her knuckles. "They believe you now." The arrest happened 2 days later. Vivian Klein was taken into custody outside her home, cameras rolling, as the image she'd spent decades constructing collapsed in seconds. For the first time, she looked human, angry, cornered, afraid. When Ethan saw the footage, he felt no triumph. Only a quiet, solemn sense of balance returning. Justice, he was learning, wasn't loud. It didn't cheer. It simply arrived and stayed. In the weeks after Ethan resigned from Masterwin, the decision was simple. The building, the people, the accolades, they all felt hollow now. Lena left 2 turning down settlements and non-disclosure agreements that came with generous numbers attached. "We're done being quiet," she said. They moved to a smaller place near the edge of the city somewhere, with trees and long walks and neighbors who didn't know their names. Healing wasn't linear. Some days were light, others were heavy with echoes. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Lena sat at the kitchen table, sorting through old photos. She paused at one from the party, their last normal moment, smiling beneath chandeliers. "I don't want this to define us," she said. "It won't," Ethan replied. "But it changed us." She nodded. Maybe that's not the same thing. He watched her, then really watched her, the strength she didn't advertise, the resilience that had carried her through places no one should have to endure. He realized something he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. They hadn't just survived. They had reclaimed themselves. Outside, the rain slowed. The city breathed. And in the quiet space they were rebuilding together, the past finally loosened its grip. The trial did not end cleanly. It never did in stories like this. It splintered outward, sending fragments into places Ethan hadn't known existed: civil suits, regulatory hearings, quiet settlements that never made headlines. Each morning brought a new article, a new analysis, a new talking head dissecting what Asterwin represented and how it had been allowed to rot from the inside. Some called it justice. Others called it an overcorrection. Ethan learned quickly that truth once exposed still had to fight for oxygen. He tried not to read the comments. Lena tried harder. There were days when she woke, shaking the memory of sterile rooms and controlled voices creeping back into her bones. Ethan learned the signs, the way her breathing changed, the way her fingers curled inward before she realized she was doing it. He learned how to sit with her without rushing, how to let silence be a shelter instead of a threat. Mara checked in often, though less formally now. She was still working cases, still pushing against walls that resisted being moved, but she'd softened with them. Less armor, more honesty. "They're going to try to discredit you again," she warned one afternoon over coffee. "It won't be loud. It'll be subtle." How, Ethan asked. "By reframing," Mara said. "They'll say you were lucky, that you benefited, that this was an anomaly." Ethan exhaled slowly. "And if people believe that, some will," Mara said. "Enough won't." The first letter arrived a week later. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a sentence printed neatly in black ink. "You should have stopped when you had the chance." Ethan stared at it for a long time before folding it and placing it in a drawer. He didn't tell Lena right away. He didn't want fear to regain territory it had already lost. But when a second letter arrived, this one referencing details of their new neighborhood, he told her everything. Lena listened without interrupting. When he finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. "They don't scare me anymore," she said quietly. He searched her face. "You're sure they took everything they could," she replied. "And they failed. That's what scares them." Still they adjusted, cameras installed, routines varied, trust rebuilt carefully, not just between them, but with the world around them. Healing, Ethan learned, was not about forgetting. It was about choosing what deserved space in the present. The civil proceedings dragged on. Grant Voss disappeared from public view, his name becoming shorthand for cowardice in certain circles. Caleb Raines accepted a plea deal that kept him out of prison long enough to watch his reputation disintegrate. Vivian Klein fought until the end motions appeals delays, but the evidence was too comprehensive, the witnesses too many. The day the verdict came down, Ethan and Lena weren't in the courtroom. They were walking along a wooded trail just outside the city, leaves crunching underfoot, the air sharp and clean. Mara called. "It's done," she said simply. "Convictions across the board." Lena stopped walking. Ethan turned toward her, bracing for a reaction he couldn't predict. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, then exhaled. When she opened them again, there were tears, but not the kind he'd grown used to. Relief. "That's it," Ethan asked softly. "That's it," Mara confirmed. "You're free." After the call ended, Lena leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest. He held her, feeling the steady beat of her heart, grounding them both in the moment. Freedom didn't arrive all at once. It came in increments. In the first night, Lena slept through without waking in terror. In the morning, Ethan realized he hadn't checked the locks twice. In the afternoon, they laughed at something trivial and then paused, surprised by the sound. They began to talk about the future again, not cautiously, not in hypotheticals, but with intention. Lena started therapy focused not on survival, but on reclaiming agency. Ethan took contract work unrelated to corporate hierarchies, choosing projects that aligned with his values rather than his ambition. One evening, Lena sat across from him at the kitchen table, a stack of papers neatly arranged. "I want to speak," she said. "To who?" Ethan asked. "Everyone," she replied. "Not as a victim, as a witness." He hesitated. "Are you ready?" She met his gaze unwavering. "I am now." The first talk was small, a local university, a modest auditorium. Lena stood at the podium with steady hands and told her story without naming names. She spoke about systems that reward silence, about how power disguises coercion as opportunity. She spoke about fear and about the moment fear stopped owning her. The room was silent when she finished. Then applause, slow at first, then rising sustained. Afterward, a young woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "I thought it was just me," she said. Lena shook her head gently. "It never is." Word spread. Invitations followed. Panels, conferences, conversations that mattered. Lena learned how to set boundaries, how to say no, how to protect the quiet she'd fought so hard to reclaim. Ethan watched her step into this new version of herself with awe and humility. He understood now that love wasn't about shielding someone from pain. It was about standing beside them when they chose to face it. Months later, on a clear morning, Ethan stood alone on the balcony of their new home, coffee cooling in his hands. The city stretched out before him, still flawed, still loud, still capable of harm, but also capable of change. Lena joined him, slipping her hand into his. The necklace rested against her collarbone, the chain no longer a symbol of fear, but of continuity. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "Every day," Ethan admitted. "But it doesn't own me anymore." She smiled softly. "Me neither." Below them, life moved on cars, voices, sunlight bouncing off windows. The world hadn't become safer, but it had become clearer. And in that clarity, Ethan understood something he'd missed before. Justice wasn't just about accountability. It was about the quiet courage to live fully after the storm had passed. The letters stopped after the verdict, as if whoever had been watching decided there was nothing left to gain. The silence that followed felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious, but gradually it softened into something closer to peace. Ethan learned to recognize the difference between vigilance and fear. One kept him alive. The other kept him trapped. He chose the first. Lena's days filled with purpose. She traveled carefully, always with clear exits and trusted contacts, but she no longer shrank from rooms. When she spoke, people listened not because of what had been done to her, but because of how clearly she named what so many had felt and never understood. She spoke about coercion that wore the mask of opportunity, about loyalty demanded without consent, about the cost of silence. Each time Ethan sat somewhere in the back, grounding himself in the simple fact that she was there, breathing, choosing. One evening, after a long drive home from a conference, Lena grew quiet in the passenger seat. Her fingers curled inward, then relaxed. "I keep thinking about the others," she said. "The ones who didn't get out. The ones who signed and disappeared into smaller lives." Ethan nodded. He had thought of them too. "What do you want to do?" She looked at him, eyes steady. "I want to build something, not a foundation with my name on it. Something practical, legal help, counseling, a place people can go before it's too late." The idea took root quickly. They reached out tomorrow to a handful of attorneys who had grown tired of defending the indefensible to therapists who understood trauma without sensationalizing it. What emerged wasn't flashy. It was careful, intentional human. A network. A lifeline. The first call came sooner than expected. A young man, voice shaking, spoke about an NDA shoved across a desk and a promotion dangled just out of reach. A woman emailed about altered performance reviews after she asked the wrong question. Each story echoed pieces of Lena's own, and each one affirmed the same truth: what happened to her had never been an exception. Ethan took on the logistical work system's security sustainability. He found satisfaction in building something that protected rather than consumed. At night, he and Lena sat together reviewing plans, arguing gently, learning how to disagree without fear. They were rebuilding not just a life, but a language between them. Still, healing was not a straight line. One afternoon, months into this new chapter, Ethan received a message from an unknown address. No threats, no bravado, just a request to meet. Against his better judgment, he told Mara. She didn't forbid it. She never did. "Public place," she said. "And you don't go alone." They chose a crowded cafe near the courthouse. The man who arrived looked older than Ethan remembered. Shoulders stooped, hair thinning, eyes tired. Caleb Raines sat down without asking. "I'm not here to ask forgiveness," Caleb said quietly. "I know better." Ethan studied him, surprised by the lack of arrogance. "Then why are you here?" Caleb folded his hands. "Because the version of myself I protected cost more than my freedom. And because there are things you should know." Mara watched from a nearby table, unreadable. Caleb spoke of systems within systems of redundancies, designed to outlast any one scandal. He named shell entities, still active people repositioning themselves quietly. He slid a flash drive across the table. "This is everything I have left," he said. "Use it or don't. I'm done carrying it." Ethan didn't reach for the drive immediately. "Why give it to me?" Caleb's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Because she didn't disappear. And because you didn't let them make you the villain." When Caleb left, Ethan sat for a long moment, the noise of the cafe washing over him. Mara joined him. "Do you trust it?" she asked. "I trust the pattern," Ethan said, "and I trust us to verify." They did. Carefully, methodically. The information led to quiet interventions, warnings issued, oversight tightened, damage limited before it could metastasize. No headlines, no speeches, just prevention. On a warm evening near the end of summer, Ethan and Lena hosted a small gathering in their backyard. Friends, allies, people who had become family through shared resolve. Laughter drifted through the air, unforced and real. Lena caught Ethan watching her from across the yard and raised an eyebrow. "You look like you're waiting for something to go wrong." He smiled sheepishly. Old habit. She crossed the grass and took his hands. "Nothing is wrong," she said. "This is just living." They stood together as dusk settled the sky, turning soft and forgiving. For the first time since the night of the party, Ethan felt his body fully relax, the constant readiness easing its grip. Later, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Lena leaned against him on the couch. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Regret what?" "Not walking away when it would have been easier," she said. He thought about the job he'd lost, the reputation he'd nearly had stripped away, the months of fear and uncertainty. He thought about the way Lena's fingers no longer curled in on themselves when doors closed. "No," he said. "I regret that it took losing you to see what mattered. But I don't regret choosing you." She smiled, rested her head on his shoulder. "Good, because I choose you too, every day." Outside, the night hummed with ordinary sounds, cars passing, leaves rustling, a distant siren fading into nothing. The world was still imperfect. Power still sought shortcuts. But somewhere within that noise, something steadier had taken hold. They had faced erasure and refused it. They had been handed a story designed to break them and rewritten it together. And in doing so, they had discovered a truth neither of them would ever forget. Survival was only the beginning. What came after purpose, connection, courage was the real victory. The invitation arrived without fanfare, tucked between routine emails and meeting confirmations. A federal oversight committee requested Lena's presence at a closed-door hearing. No cameras, no speeches, just questions. Ethan read it twice, before handing it to her, watching her expression carefully. "I don't have to," she said, more statement than question. "No," he agreed. "You don't." She folded the letter neatly. "But I will." The building was older than most of the scandals it had witnessed. Stone corridors, high ceilings, the smell of paper and time. Lena walked beside Ethan until the security checkpoint where he had to stop. They shared a look that said everything they didn't need to say. Then she passed through alone. Inside the room was long and plain. Faces arranged behind nameplates, some curious, some guarded. Lena took her seat and waited. When the first question came, it wasn't hostile. It was precise. "Why didn't you report this sooner?" She answered without defensiveness. Because the system made reporting feel like self-destruction. More questions followed. About pressure. About language used to disguise threats. About the quiet ways power moved money and people to avoid accountability. Lena spoke carefully, refusing speculation, sticking to what she knew. She didn't frame herself as brave. She framed the process as broken. When it ended, there was no applause, just a collective exhale. A chair scraped. Someone thanked her. Someone else asked for follow-up documentation. As she stood to leave, an older woman at the far end met her eyes and nodded once, slow and deliberate. It felt like acknowledgement, not absolution, but recognition. Outside, Ethan waited on the steps, sunlight washing the stone in pale gold. She crossed the distance between them and leaned into him, a quiet release he felt all the way through his chest. "How was it?" he asked. "Necessary," she said. The weeks that followed brought change without spectacle. New guidelines circulated. Whistleblower protections expanded. Oversight mechanisms were reinforced with language that actually meant something. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was enough to matter. Not everyone was pleased. A private firm offered Ethan a consulting role with a salary that made his head spin. He declined. Another approached Lena, proposing a partnership that would have put her name on a glossy brochure. She declined that too. They were learning the power of saying no, not as resistance, but as choice. One afternoon, while reviewing intake reports for the network they'd built, Ethan noticed a familiar pattern in a new case. The names were different, the industry was different, the tactics were not. He called Mara. "You seeing this?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "It's spreading. But so are countermeasures." "Can we stop it?" he asked. "We can interrupt it," Mara replied. Enough interruptions change behavior. That night, Ethan dreamed of the ballroom not as it had been, but as it should have been. No chandeliers, no applause, just an empty room with open doors. He woke with the sense that the past had finally loosened its hold. A month later, the journalist who had first broken the story requested an interview, not about the scandal, but about the aftermath. Ethan hesitated. Lena considered. "If we do it," she said, "we do it our way." They met in a small studio with neutral walls, no dramatic lighting, no music cues. The journalist asked measured questions. Lena answered them plainly. Ethan spoke once briefly about the cost of silence and the value of witnesses. When the piece aired, it didn't trend. It didn't explode. It lingered. Emails trickled in quiet thanks, careful questions, stories shared in confidence. The kind of impact that didn't spike and fade, but accumulated. On a crisp morning, Ethan and Lena drove out to the coast. The air smelled of salt and cold. They walked along the shoreline, shoes in hand waves rolling in with steady insistence. "Do you ever miss it?" Ethan asked. The life we had before Lena watched the water for a long moment. "I miss who we were before we were tested," she said. "But I don't miss being unaware." He nodded. "Me neither." They stopped near a tide pool, sunlight refracting through shallow water. Lena crouched, tracing the edge with a fingertip. "We could have disappeared," she said softly. "It would have been easier." "And smaller," Ethan replied. She looked up at him, smiling. "Exactly." As winter approached, invitations slowed. The network stabilized into a rhythm. New volunteers joined. Others moved on. The work continued without needing them at the center. That was the point. One evening, a familiar name appeared in Ethan's inbox, Vivian Klein's attorney. A settlement offer. An apology drafted in precise legal language. No admission of wrongdoing. A request for closure. Ethan forwarded it to Lena without comment. She read it, then closed the document. "No," she said. "Closure isn't a transaction." He smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." They burned the letter in the fireplace, watching the words curl and disappear. It felt symbolic without being performative. An ending chosen, not imposed. Later, curled together on the couch, Lena spoke quietly. "I don't want to be known for what they did." "You won't be," Ethan said. "You'll be known for what you did after." She rested her head on his shoulder. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, patient, transforming the city without asking permission. In the morning, the world would keep moving. New risks would emerge. Old habits would try to return. But the path they had carved, careful, principled human, would remain. They had learned that justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it walked steadily, carrying files and listening carefully, refusing to look away. And that was enough. The sentencing took place on a gray morning that felt deliberately muted, as if the world itself refused to dramatize what was about to happen. Ethan and Lena arrived early, passing through security with the practiced calm of people who had learned how to breathe in places designed to compress you. The courtroom filled slowly, attorneys with careful smiles, clerks arranging papers, a few reporters who had learned restraint after months of watching bravado collapse into fact. Caleb Raines entered first. He looked smaller than Ethan remembered, shoulders drawn, inward, eyes scanning for exits that no longer existed. The plea deal had spared him the longest sentence, but not the truth. He listened as the judge summarized a life reduced to actions and consequences. And when his name was called, he stood without protest. Vivian Klein entered last. She wore a tailored suit that echoed the authority she once wielded, but it no longer fit the room. Power, Ethan realized, only worked when others agreed to believe in it. Here, belief had been replaced by record. As the judge read the findings, Ethan watched Vivian's face for signs of collapse. There were none. What he saw instead was calculation giving way to inevitability. When the sentence was handed down, years, not months. She exhaled slowly, as if conceding a long-fought battle. No one cheered, no one clapped. Justice arrived like weather, impartial, unavoidable, and finally done. Outside, the sky broke open with a thin band of light. Lena stood beside Ethan, hands tucked into her coat sleeves, eyes closed for a moment longer than necessary. "How do you feel?" he asked. She considered the question carefully. "Finished," she said. Not healed, but finished with that chapter. They didn't stay for interviews. They didn't linger. They walked until the courthouse was a block behind them, and the city resumed its ordinary rhythm. Somewhere nearby, a street musician played a slow, hopeful melody. Lena stopped to listen, letting the sound wash over her. The weeks that followed were quieter than Ethan expected. The absence of crisis created a vacuum he hadn't prepared for. Without deadlines dictated by fear, time stretched differently. He learned to fill it with intention, morning walks, careful meals, conversations that didn't orbit trauma. Lena continued therapy not because she was broken, but because she wanted to understand who she was becoming. Some days were hard, others were surprisingly light. She learned to recognize the moment tension entered her shoulders and how to release it before it took root. She learned that strength wasn't always loud, and rest wasn't weakness. The network they built matured. Leadership spread. Decisions were shared. Ethan stepped back from daily operations, focusing instead on infrastructure and security quiet work that ensured the system would hold, even when attention moved on. One afternoon, he received an email from a former Asterwin employee he barely remembered. It was short and unadorned. "Because of what you and Lena did, I didn't sign. I walked away. It cost me. But I'm okay." Ethan forwarded it to Lena with a simple note. This mattered. She replied with a heart and nothing else. As spring approached, they returned to the hotel where the party had taken place. Not inside, neither of them wanted that, but across the street at a small cafe with a clear view of the balcony. They sat by the window, watching people come and go, the building looming like a relic from another life. "I used to think this place took something from me," Lena said, stirring her coffee. "But it also gave me something." "What's that?" Ethan asked. "Clarity," she said, "about who I am and who I won't be." Ethan nodded. "Me too." They sat in silence, not avoiding the memory, but refusing to be owned by it. When they left, Lena didn't look back. That summer, Ethan turned down a speaking engagement that would have put him on a large stage. Instead, he accepted an invitation to mentor a small group of early career professionals navigating ethical dilemmas. The conversations were honest, messy, hopeful. He didn't offer answers. He offered questions. Lena joined him once, listening quietly from the back. Afterward, she smiled. "You're good at this. I learned from watching you," he said. On an unremarkable Tuesday, a package arrived without a return address. Inside was Lena's cooperation agreement, the one she never signed, returned by the court as evidence no longer needed. Ethan held it carefully, as if it might still burn. Lena took it from him, read the first page, and then fed it through the shredder. The sound was loud in the quiet room. Final. That night, they cooked dinner together, laughing at a burned pan, improvising where the recipe failed. Ordinary life reclaimed. Months later, on the anniversary of the party, they took the day off. No speeches, no commemorations, just a drive out of town windows down Music Low. They hiked a familiar trail and sat on a ridge overlooking a wide-open valley. Ethan broke the silence. "If I could change one thing," Lena interrupted gently. "You choose differently earlier." He smiled ruefully. "Yes." She took his hand. "So would I. But we're here now, and we're not who we were." He squeezed her fingers. "Better, more honest," she said. "Which is better." As the sun dipped, casting long shadows across the valley, Ethan felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. The story they'd lived would never be simple. It would never be clean. But it would be theirs, defined not by what was taken, but by what they chose to build after. They stood and began the walk back. Footsteps aligned the path clear enough. The past was no longer chasing them. The city woke slowly on the morning Ethan realized he no longer felt hunted. It wasn't a dramatic revelation, no sudden rush of relief or triumphant music in his head. It was quieter than that. He stood at the kitchen window, coffee warming his hands, watching a delivery truck idle across the street while the driver checked his phone. Ordinary, unthreatening. The kind of moment that once would have slipped by unnoticed, but now felt earned. Lena was still asleep. She'd had a late session the night before, guiding a small group through a legal prep workshop. No cameras, no speeches, just people learning how to protect themselves before someone else decided their fate. Ethan listened from the other room as she spoke, steady and patient, never raising her voice. When she finished, there had been silence on the line, followed by quiet thanks. Not gratitude laced with desperation. Gratitude grounded in understanding. He heard her footsteps, now soft against the floor. "You're up early," she said, wrapping a sweater around herself and joining him at the window. "I was thinking," Ethan replied, "about how strange it is that peace doesn't announce itself." Lena smiled faintly. "It never does. You only notice it when it's been gone for a while." They sat together at the table, sharing breakfast without urgency. No phones buzzing with updates. No alerts demanding response. The absence of pressure felt unfamiliar but welcome. Later that day, Ethan drove across town to a modest office building where the network they'd helped build held its quarterly review. He wasn't on the agenda. He liked it that way. He sat in the back listening as others discussed budget's outreach case intake. The work had grown beyond them. That he knew was the real measure of success. A young man stood to speak near the end, nervous, determined. He talked about leaving a job that required him to lie about choosing uncertainty over compliance. His voice wavered, but he didn't stop. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. After the meeting, the young man approached him. "I just wanted to say, your story gave me the courage to walk away." Ethan shook his head gently. "Wasn't my story that did that." The man smiled, understanding. "Still, thank you." That evening, Ethan and Lena took a long walk through their neighborhood. The trees were shedding leaves, the air crisp and clean. They talked about small things, what to cook, where to travel next, whether to adopt a dog. Normal plans, real plans. "Do you ever worry it could happen again?" Ethan asked. Not accusatory, just honest. Lena considered it. "I worry about pretending it can't," she said, "but not about living in fear of it." They reached a small park and sat on a bench watching children chase each other under fading light. Laughter drifted across the grass. "I used to think justice meant punishment," Lena said quietly. "Now I think it means interruption." Ethan nodded. "Stopping the cycle before it claims someone else?" "Exactly." The final court order arrived weeks later, a thick envelope heavy with finality. No surprises, no reversals. Just confirmation that what had been done would remain named recorded, impossible to erase. Ethan placed it in a file, not as a trophy, but as a boundary. This far, no further. That night, Lena took out the necklace, the one she'd worn again, only recently. She held it for a moment, then clasped it around her neck with steady hands. "It doesn't scare me anymore," she said. Ethan watched the pendant settle against her skin, no longer a reminder of loss, but of continuity. "It shouldn't," he replied. "It brought you back." She smiled. "We brought each other back." They didn't celebrate the ending. They didn't mark it with a date or a ritual. Instead, they lived it day by day, choice by choice. Some mornings were still heavy. Some nights still carried echoes. But the weight no longer defined them. On a quiet weekend, Ethan sat down and wrote a single page. No names, no accusations. Just lessons learned. He shared it privately with a small group. It circulated quietly, passed from hand to hand, read in moments of doubt. When he finished, he deleted the draft and closed the laptop. The story that had once threatened to consume them no longer needed retelling. It had done its work. As winter approached again, Ethan and Lena stood on their balcony, watching the city lights flicker on. The air was cold, but they didn't go inside right away. "Do you think people really change?" Ethan asked. Lena leaned into him. "I think people choose," she said, "over and over. And sometimes those choices add up to change." He wrapped an arm around her, feeling the quiet strength in her presence. The world below was still imperfect, still capable of cruelty. But it was also capable of witness, of courage, of repair. They had faced erasure and answered with truth. They had been offered silence and chosen voice. And in doing so, they had learned something neither of them would ever forget. The most powerful ending isn't revenge. It's freedom. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from a single person. It comes from a system that rewards silence and punishes truth. This story isn't just about a vanished wife or a corrupt company. It's about what happens when ordinary people refuse to disappear, even when fear tells them it would be easier. Healing isn't forgetting what hurt you. It's choosing not to let it define the rest of your life. Justice isn't always loud, and courage isn't always dramatic, but both begin the moment you decide your voice matters. If this story resonated with you, then take a moment to reflect on where you've chosen silence over self-respect and where you might choose differently next time. CTA. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what part of this journey stayed with you the most. And if you want more deep cinematic stories about betrayal, healing, and hard-won truth, don't forget to subscribe.